What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards, old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. As well as our second channel sponsor, the Hobby Horse in Taylorville, Illinois. If you're ever in town, be sure to stop in and say hi to Martin. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you our first Pauper EDH game of the season and our first Pauper game since episode 52 of Season 2. For those of you who don't know, Pauper EDH is a format variation on Commander, where instead of a legendary creature, your commander can be any uncommon creature including legendaries. Your deck is also constructed of 99 commons including basic lands, your life total starts at 30 life instead of 40, and your commander damage is reduced to 16 instead of 21. This week's Pauper matchup features Martin playing his flying tribal deck being led by Kangee Warden, Ray making a first appearance on the channel playing Adam's Falthis and Keleth Familiar partner deck, Falthis playing his Hulking Metamorph deck, and Foil playing his Spider Tribal deck featuring Rotwidow packs as his commander. Now that we're fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Martin plays an island. Ray plays a command tower while Fog plays an island of his own. Foil then plays a forest before tapping it to play the only turn 1 play of the game, a Diligent Farmhand. Martin plays a plains while Ray also plays a plains before he pays 2 to cast his commander Keleth. On his end step, Fog pays 1 to cast a Trickery Charm, choosing to look at the top 4 cards of his library and put them back in any order before he then draws for turn. Fog then plays a second island before casting a Cloud of Fairies, which has him untapping both of his lands. Foil just plays a swamp and passes. Martin plays a second plains before paying 3 to cast a Warden of Evos Isle. Ray also plays a plains for turn before paying 3 to cast a second commander, Falthis. Ray then attacks Fog with Keleth, which has him adding a 1/1 counter to his commander, while Fog then takes 2 commander damage. Fog plays a Seed of the Synod and then passes turn, and on his end step, Foil pays to crack his farmhand in order to go get a swamp to put into play tapped. Foil then draws for turn and plays a forest before paying 1 to cast an Innocent Blood, and in response, Fog casts Call to the Heel to bounce his Cloud of Fairies back to his hand and draw a card, while each player then sacrifices a creature. Foil then casts an Arachnus Web enchanting Ray's other commander before passing. Martin draws for turn and then plays an island before paying 4 in order to cast a Syndicate Messenger. Ray draws for turn and then casts an Angelic Intervention, giving his commander protection from green, which has Foil's enchantment falling off. Ray then adds a counter to his commander and casts Touch of Moonglove before he then goes to combat, attacking Foil, which adds a counter to his commander and deals 5 commander damage. Fog plays another island for turn before he then pays 2 to recast his Cloud of Fairies, untapping his 2 lands. He then pays 1 and casts an Aether Spellbomb before passing his turn. Foil just pays to cast a Juvenile Gloom Widow and passes. Martin plays another plains before going to combat, swinging his bird at Fog, who in response casts a Deliberate in order to scry 2 and then draw a card. Fog then takes his damage, and second main, Martin pays 3 to cast a Mistral Singer. Ray draws and then pays 1 to enchant the Gloom Widow with an Oppressive Raise. He then pays another 1 to enchant his commander with a Molten Snakeskin before going to combat, adding another counter to his commander and swinging him at Foil. Foil then doesn't block and goes to 11 commander damage. On his end step, Fog casts a Brainstorm and draws 3 cards and puts 2 cards from his hand back on top of his library. He then untaps for turn and draws before playing another island. Fog then pays 4 to cast his commander for its prototype cost, making it a copy of his Cloud of Fairies, which has him untapping 2 lands when he enters play. Foil draws and then casts a Grappler Spider before passing. Martin plays another island for turn before he then pays to try to enchant Fog's commander with a Dreadful Apathy, and in response, Fog counters this with a negate. Martin then goes to combat, swinging one of his creatures at Fog while he swings his other creature at Ray, which has neither of them blocking and taking their damage. Second main phase, Martin pays to cast a Windrake. Ray finally plays a 4th land for turn and then continues to pick on Foil by casting a Terror in order to destroy a spider. He then casts Unbound Potential, putting 2 1/1 counters on his commander, before he then goes to combat, adding an additional counter and swinging at Foil, unsurprisingly. Foil then responds by casting a Terrifying Presence in order to Fog combat damage before Ray passes turn. Fog draws and then casts an Ecologist Terrarium, which has him going to get a basic land from his library to put into his hand, which he then plays for turn. He then pays 2 to cast a Glimmerbell before going to combat, swinging his commander at Ray for 3 damage in the air. Foil plays a Swamp for turn and then casts a Hitchclaw Recluse before casting an Archer's Parapet. Martin plays a Plains for turn and then goes straight to combat, swinging all of his creatures at Fog for some reason, taking him down to 17 life. He then pays 5 and asks for Fog's permission to cast his commander Kangee. Ray draws for turn and then casts Defend the Campus, targeting Fog's commander, and in response, Fog exiles his commander with a Teferi's Time Twist. Ray then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Fog this time, who blocks with his Glimmer Bell. And on his end step, Fog's commander once again comes back into play as a copy of the Cloud of Fairies, entering with an additional 1/1 counter and untapping 2 of his lands. He then uses the 2 lands to cycle a Lonely Sandbar and draw a card. Fog then untaps her turn and draws before playing another island. He then pays the Krakus Terranian, giving his commander another 1/1 counter, before he then swings him at Ray in the air for 9 more commander damage. Foil draws for turn and then pays to cast his commander, Rotwidow. Martin plays an island for turn and then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Foil, 2 of his creatures at Fog, and 1 of his creatures at Ray. Ray and Fog both take their damage, while Foil takes 5 commander damage and Martin passes turn. Ray draws for turn and then once again continues to bully Foil by going to combat, swinging his pumped up commander at him once again. Foil decides to block with his Rampart, and in response, Ray casts a Butcher's Glee to give his creature lifelink. In response to this, Fog pays to bounce the commander back to Ray's hand before damage is dealt, so he doesn't gain any life. Fog draws for turn and then casts an Experimental Augury, which has him looking at the top 3 cards of his library and putting 1 of them into his hand while he bottoms the rest. He then proliferates the counters on his commander and pays 2 to cast an Escape Artist. He then decides to poke the bear and this time swings his commander at Martin, who responds by casting a Kicked into the Royal, which has him bouncing Fog's creature back to his hand while he then draws a card from it being kicked. Foil draws for turn and then pays 2 in order to cast his Snare Spinner. Martin draws for turn and goes straight to combat, once again swinging 1 creature at Ray, 1 creature at Fog, and then 2 creatures over at Foil. Foil decides to block 1 of the creatures before thinking for a moment and deciding to block his commander as well. Ray and Fog then both take their damage while Foil's spiders go to the graveyard and Martin creates a 1/1 spirit token. Ray finally plays a Swamp for turn and then he taps out in order to recast his commander Falthis a second time. Fog draws for turn and then recasts his commander, this time having him come into play as a copy of his Escape Artist. On his end step, Foil pays to use his Parapet, tapping it to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents. He then plays a tapped Path of Ancestry before paying 3 in order to cast a Far Wanderings or Threshold. This then has him going into his library in order to get 3 basic lands to put into play tapped. Martin draws for turn and then plays a Plains before going to combat, swinging his commander and Windrake at Foil, his Spear over at Ray, and his other creature over at Fog. In response, Fog casts a Displace. This then has him return to play and his commander coming into play as a copy of the Cloud of Fairies, and it has him untapping 4 of his lands. He then blocks a creature who's coming at him while Ray and Foil both take their damage. Ray draws for turn and then casts an Agonizing Scythe in order to deal 3 damage to Martin's commander while he then gains 3 life. He then pays 1 in order to enchant Martin's Windrake with a weakness and passes his turn to Fog. Fog plays another island for turn before then going to combat, swinging his commander at Martin. Martin then exiles him with an Expel before he then goes to his second main phase, paying 6 in order to recast his commander as a copy of his Cloud of Fairies, untapping 2 of his lands. Foil draws for turn and then casts a Frostweb Spider before he then pays to cast a Summerbolt Spider as well. Martin draws for turn and then pays to recast his commander a second time. Ray plays a Plains for turn and then pays 2 to recast his commander Keleth before paying an additional 2 to cast a Perish Blade Trainee. Fog plays a Mystic Sanctuary for turn, which has him putting a Brainstorm back on top of his library from his graveyard. He then pays 3 to cast a Raven form, targeting Martin's commander, sending him back to the command zone but replacing him with a 1/1 bird token. Foil draws for turn and then casts a Bitter Revelation, which has him looking at the top 4 cards of his library and putting 2 of them into his hand and the rest into his graveyard before he loses 2 life. Foil then pays to cast a very unfortunate Pestilence and passes his turn. Martin draws for turn and then pays to recast Kangee a 3rd time before dealing 3 damage to Ray in the air. Ray draws for turn and then casts a Whispersoul Cloak before then paying the 2 to equip it to his commander. He then goes to combat and finally completes his goal of taking Foil out of the game by attacking with his commander for 3 commander damage. Fog draws for turn, then casts a Brainstorm that he put on top of his library. This then has him drawing 3 more cards and putting 2 cards from his hand back on top. He then pays 1 to cast a Witching Well, which has him scrying the 2 cards he just put on top of his library to the bottom of his library. Fog then pays to sack the Witching Well in order to draw 2 cards, before he then pays 1 to cast a Fairy Seer, scrying 2 more cards at the bottom of his library. Fog then decides to send a message to Martin by attacking him for 1 damage before passing. Martin draws for turn and then goes straight to combat, swinging all out with all of his creatures at Fog, who decides to not block any of the creatures and let Ray deal with this problem that he created on his own. Martin then casts an Expedition Diviner and passes his turn to Ray, who then draws for turn and knows he's dead, so he concedes the game. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.